All right, so Chip asked for me to demonstrate how I do the silver wire inlay. And so I thought I'd put together a quick little video. I don't got much time here before I go to work, but kind of just showing what I normally do. So the silver wire, which you can use copper too, I've done as well, but you want to have this basic same dimensions. So it's about 3/32 of an inch wide, so that's the width. And then it's 28 gauge, so that means it's like 0.013. So somewhere in the 0.01 something range is usually about the right thickness, I guess, because that's about the same thickness as an X-Acto blade, which is what I use to punch in the pattern. So the first thing I do when I get the wire is it comes like in a little roll like this, and I basically just take some 220 sandpaper and just kind of scrape it. This puts little tiny little grooves in it, and you can see how shiny the normal stuff is, and then I put little grooves in it, and that helps it grip a little bit better when you put it in. For actually inlaying material, I will draw out the pattern on the wood. It doesn't really matter. And then I have these tools, which I made. These are X-Acto blades, and these are just cheap tool holders I got on Amazon. You don't need this really. You could just use an X-Acto blade holder, like the normal one if you want to, or whatever you want to do. But what I did is I ground down. You can see kind of how I grounded in and made this kind of flat chisel shape to it. And they're different widths. For this one is good for going in a straight line. It's easier to follow a straight line, but because it's wider, it's actually harder to press down and get the depth you need, especially on really hard woods. So I typically like ones that are at least this thin. And I actually had one that was even thinner, but I actually just snapped it off on my last project. This one is probably, I don't know, maybe 3/16, and this one's maybe 1/8 of an inch, something like that. They might be a little shorter. Again, you can mess with it. I just went to my grinder, and you could do this with a file or whatever you wanted. And then I kind of ground it. It's kind of hard to see because it's so small, but basically the profile on the edge is just like this, and to a sharp point. And I just did a little file to kind of just take down each side. And then I used my diamond stones to get it even sharper, and then a strop. And this is what I use. I always keep this by, because I'm always kind of stropping this to keep it nice and sharp, because it makes it way easier to press it down. You don't need it to be super sharp, but it makes your hands not hurt as much after you're done, because sometimes you have to put a lot of pressure, especially on wide ones like this. So basically, I have my block of wood, and I'd have a pattern drawn. Actually, I guess maybe I should draw a pattern. I'll have a pattern drawn out, whatever I'm going to do. And basically, I go to the start of it, and I take the edge of it, and I line it up with the direction I want to go, and just rest it there. Then I rock up, and as I rock up, I'm pressing down, and I'm sinking it down. And you can see by my hand shaking there, sometimes, especially if you're going cross grain like this, you have to put a lot of pressure to sever those fibers. Sometimes some parts of the wood are just easier to do than others. And so I'll pull it out, and now I have the little divot where it started. And the bottom of this blade is flat to create a flat groove, because that way that this rests all the way on the bottom really nice. So in order to continue the line, I just stick it back in here in the same groove, but I'm doing it at an angle so that when I rock up, I'm on the edge of the next part of it. So you're kind of overlapping your cuts by about half every single time, and then I'll press down, pull up, go forward and rock, pull up, and just continue this around as I go. Now this is a little bit wider of a one than I normally use. Like I said, I broke my thinner one, which helps me get into tight curves. But now that I turn this corner, it's becoming a lot easier because now I'm going with the grain. So you'll notice a difference depending on the grain direction and stuff like that. So go around like that. And then, so I have this kind of cut in and it looks really rough. And sometimes you can look down in there and you can see little spots where you missed connecting in and you left a little wall. You need to get those out of there. So I'll go back in and I'll just kind of press down on those spots to make sure that the bottom of the groove is nice and flat, like that. Now, once I have the groove done, how I like it, this is for demonstration only, I'll take my wire, and I got these nifty little, they're flat cutters, so they have a flat on this back end, and they snip right up to that flat. So that's really nice for getting in right into an edge and cutting it flat right where you want it to when it's in place. So these are really handy. These are Crescent brand. I think I got them on Amazon. They're kind of expensive, but they're really nice. And then I got these little needle nose pliers for helping to hold it. Sometimes with smaller pieces, it's hard to keep your hands in there. So the next thing I do is I just stick the edge right into the end of my pattern, and then I just give it a light tap with the hammer on top, and it kind of sinks it in just a little bit, and sometimes it pops out, so you gotta kind of figure out how far to do it. And then I'll bend and form it like that to whatever shape I'm doing, and as I go along I'll hammer it in just a little bit to keep it down. And now it's popping up because I came to the end of my pattern. So then I'll take my little snips, my handy little snips here, and then I'll find where I want to cut it at, which is right about there, and cut it. So these are just little wire snips, and then I can come in with the hammer, and sometimes you have to like stand it up because you'll bend the wire over. I mean, this is sterling silver, so it's really soft, and sometimes you have to kind of manipulate it to make it stand up. And I can see now that I actually cut it a little bit too long, so I'll come back in and cut just a little bit more off, and maybe actually a little bit more than that right there, and then I should be able to sink it. Now you don't have to get it flush. This one I did pretty deep, so that's pretty flush, but this is sticking up, and that's fine. Kind of like that, and you can see kind of bent over, and that's okay as long as it's down in there. And then at this point I would just put some water on it. It would swell the fibers, lock it in. I'd let that dry, and then I'd come back with you could try a file to kind of get this off, but I find the file kind of tends to grab and then pull it up, because while it's in there, you can go in there with a pair of pliers or something and just pull it out at this point. But I usually like to use sandpaper, like in a little tiny sandpaper disc in my drill, and just kind of smooth it out with some like 220 or something like that, and get it down to the surface. And then after that, I just use sandpaper and go through the regular finishing process, and you'd be surprised at how all these like little gaps and stuff that you have, they kind of fill in by themselves. So that's the basic process. Let me know if you have any more questions.